On today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Batman. We're going to do a non-spoiler discussion up front, and then I will very clearly let you know when we are going to delve into some spoilers, plot points from the movie, things I noticed, Easter eggs and such. But I gotta say, that was one heck of a ride. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Way of the Dad podcast, where we fearlessly dive into the depths of dadness. If you like what you are hearing, please share the podcast and give it a review on the platform where you listen. Thank you. Welcome back to the Way of the Dad podcast. I'm glad to have you here, and today is, well, I'm still riding pretty high from last night. Sorry if my voice sounds a little off. Been dealing with some allergies here in the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area. We're having, I believe this is called, this particular season here is called False Spring, or Spring of Deception, I believe. We're currently waiting for third winter to come around. So, got my allergies all worked up and been trying to make sure I don't lose my voice. But, yeah, last night, we did our family Friday night last night, which was actually a Saturday. Just worked out better that way. But we haven't had any, we've kind of finished most of the shows we're currently watching. And I'd seen some of the early reviews for the Batman, kind of got pretty pumped about it. And so, made a command decision that we are taking Family Friday night to the cinema. And boy, was it worth it. I mean, just wow. So a little bit of a brief backstory. As a teenager, I was definitely more of a Marvel fan. I got introduced to the X-Men, love collecting X-Men. And then, of course, as a comic book fan, they do their best to make sure they expose you to as many other comic lines as possible. But I was definitely more of a Marvel fan. But I did pick up and really enjoy certain Batman time frames. Times like when Bane broke Batman's back and the Azrael Batman run for a while. I enjoyed that quite a bit. And a couple other small, short run but interesting runs of Batman comics. I do like I can't help it. I'm kind of a fan of the Frank Miller Batman Returns comics, which they did a great job turning those into the animated movies. I mean, they're almost frame for frame. They're really, really well done. But I have to say that my fandom of Batman came through movies, really. I mean, I was blown away when I saw the 89 Tim Burton Batman. And I mean, that was my first major. Of course, that was before, that would be 89. So that was probably about 3 or 4 years before I started collecting any comics at all. And my heavy collection was X-Men and Marvel. So my first exposure was Tim Burton's 89 Batman. So I really have always enjoyed Batman. And of course, I've picked up over the years. I enjoy the animated movies. I got to say, I don't know what it is about what it is about DC, I should say. But man, they do animated movies in a way that Marvel just doesn't seem to be able to quite figure out. I would say there's a ton of DC animated movies that are really well done. Fantastic. Excellent writing. With weight. A lot of times you think of a cartoon as lightweight or easy watching or not real, That's not the real stuff. Oh, a lot of them are fantastic. Mask of the Phantasm. What was it? The Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker, I believe. I think. Something like that. So I like a lot of that. So that's where my Batman fandom really came from, was movies. So my favorite Batman series, though, is the Nolan trilogy, which is, I don't think should come as a shock, even if you disagree. You probably heard that 1,050 times. And I really enjoyed the take on Batman there. And so I say all that to say that I came away from the Batman last night feeling like that perch, that top of the hill perch that the Nolan trilogy holds in my heart, or in my feelings, it threatens that very severely. So the overview of the movie is, without spoilers, we're staying non-spoiler right now, is, the setup is the Riddler is killing prominent members of Gotham, and of course Batman and Gordon are going to investigate. This movie is fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic. This movie definitely has some places where it's taking, let's call it inspiration. There's definitely heavy noir crime drama in this movie. There's also heavy Seven vibes, David Fincher vibes. This movie is very dark, it is very gritty, it is very grounded, but in a way that makes a lot of sense and that works correctly, and quite frankly just done really, really well. This movie almost has some level of horror or intense thriller vibes to it. This movie is not for your young kids. I'm telling you right now, it is not. If you thought the Dark Knight series was dark, that thought process is going to get recalibrated for you. So just know this going in ahead. If you've watched the trailer, you probably already figured that out. But I just want to make sure you're clear. This is not a movie for your kid. This is not campy funny. This is not some of the lighter animated stuff. This movie's rough. This movie also features something we really haven't seen too terribly much. I mean, obviously the Batman Begins did show this to a degree. A young, early on Batman. He's rough around the edges, very rough. He's younger, he's impulsive, prone to making mistakes. That would be funny, maybe, if the stakes weren't so serious for him. He doesn't have the backing of, the police department really yet. And they've shown that in the trailers. I don't think that's really spoilery. He's early on. It's almost like they have a grudging tolerance for the Batman, that's a very realistic take. Cops don't like vigilante justice, and fairly understandably so. I have to say the casting in this movie is virtually perfect. And, a lot of people like to get into, oh, well, which Batman do you think better, blah, 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 or which Catwoman do you think's better? I don't like those comparisons because it's kind of like talking about eras of the NBA or the NFL or, just eras of sports in general. It's hard to compare because the movies, the set, the tone of them are very, very different. The Nolan Batman wouldn't work in this one as well. It wasn't wrote for it. So what I like to do is I like to try to just take, does the Batman, the character or the actor playing the Batman, or the actor playing Catwoman or Riddler or Penguin or whatever, does it fit the tone of the show? Do they do a good job within what this particular movie or show is trying to do? And so that's what I mean when I say virtually pitch perfect casting. I mean, Pattinson is fantastic. Zoe Kravitz is an excellent Catwoman. Colin Farrell is virtually unrecognizable as the Riddler, or as the Penguin. Paul Dano does a great job as the Riddler. Andy Serkis is a wonderful Alfred. Really, I don't know of any part of the casting that really let me down, or I was like, that was okay. As much as I like the Nolan movies, Katie Holmes just didn't have the weight to handle being, like, I just never believed really her performance as, what was it, Rachel Dawes, I believe. I thought Maggie Gyllenhaal was significantly better from a acting potential and talent and like bringing weight and gravity to the role. I think she was much better. Totally understood the recast there. But in this movie, I never felt like that about anybody. I felt like they all fit their roles really, really well. even John Turturro, who, I'm used to him playing a little zanier, wackier type of character, like whatever the agent was he played in the Transformer movies. I will say he did really well in this as Falcone. I was kind of surprised that he was in it as Falcone, and then as I watched him, I was like, okay, I'm buying this. And that's the goal of an actor, is to make you buy their performance. The writing, the production values, the set design, the coloring, the shots were all fantastic in this movie. I mean, this movie really is just phenomenal. If you like Batman, the character, and you like Batman movies, you're probably going to like this one, especially if you like, say, like the Nolan trilogy. You're going to like this one most likely. It's also going to help if you like detective-type movies, thrillers like Seven, like a lot of the David Fincher movies, things like that. So just as an aside real quick, I'm going to try to do my best in post-processing here to get rid of all of the wonderful geese who have decided to have I guess some kind of a fan convention. Like, it sounds like they got a Comic-Con going out there, whatever the equivalent for a Comic-Con for geese is, outside my garage. So hopefully I can knock this out in post-processing. But if you do hear a little bit of geese back there, just know I live in a real place, in a real world. And unfortunately, the geese, they like to get their talk on here in the morning, apparently. So that's my feeling on this from a non-spoiler perspective. This is a fantastic movie. This is an awesome, awesome Batman movie. And I absolutely want more. I highly recommend you go see it. I can't recommend it enough. I mean, it's phenomenal. Just don't take your kids there, and I'd say probably as long as they're, I'm guessing, around 12 or so, and you're going to have to, your mileage may vary. You're going to have to know your kid. Do they struggle to understand the difference between reality and what they see on TV? Or do they tend to take it all in as if it's real and actual? My daughter, for the longest time, I always said she didn't watch a movie, she felt a movie. She would flip out. I mean, I think it was Doctor Strange. There was like some tense music, and she was already like just freaking out. Of course, this was a while ago. She's 13 now. The only thing she covers her eyes for is when like say like a guy and a girl share just a simple kiss on screen. She thinks that's disgusting. So we're going to go ahead and get into the spoilers. So I'm just giving you a big heads up right now. I am about to start talking about very specific things in the movie. If you haven't seen the movie and you hate being spoiled, you really want to pause this right now. Go watch the movie. Come on back. Pick it up where you left off. Most of your podcast players will remember right where you left off, so will YouTube. Getting into some spoilers. Now, I probably am going to be bouncing around a lot if you have seen the movie. I don't think this will be in chronological. These are just things that I thought of. Watched a couple other big breakdown videos just so I could kind of get my mind on trying to make sure I don't forget certain points that I like or didn't like or I thought was interesting or notable or whatever. I really have very little to say that's negative about this movie. Now, if anybody out there is concerned about what we get in this day and age with, personal politics being put on display or wokeness or whatever you want to call it, I can say that there was literally one line that really felt inserted in a non-organic way. I mean, that it felt slightly unnatural. And it was a line by Catwoman. It wasn't totally not understandable. Catwoman has never been a fan of the rich socialites of Gotham, things like that. But she goes out of her way to say rich white guys or rich white people. It was like, okay, but not all of them are rich, or not all of them are white, but okay, sure, I get it. She's talking about the old money and the corruption of Gotham, and I get that. It just felt slightly off. It was like, I don't know. It felt like it was very on the nose, and it didn't feel quite as organic as literally 99.9% of the rest of the movie. So from that perspective, if you care about that, if those kinds of things bother you, I mean, yeah, it exists. It just, like I said, felt slightly inserted, but, other than that, I didn't pick up anything that felt off or out of place or, artificial, to the script, to the narrative, where all of a sudden you have a character says something that seems a little off, things like that. Almost everything else was 100% felt organic, felt real, felt natural, felt like these characters, yes, that's what they would say. That sounds right to them. It matches. So things that I took away, I guess, is what I want to go. I really liked seeing Batman from a raw, not quite rookie, but a novice perspective. And one of the things that struck me, but of course made perfect sense, was he's not a friend with the cops. The cops don't like him. The police force doesn't like him. And it makes perfect sense. Cops don't like vigilantes. They don't want them to take the law into their own hands. But in this, the way that they're done here, there might also be a part of, we don't like this guy because he's going to ruin what we got set up, especially with the high brass of the police force. Not the low, not as much the low regular cops, but like some of the detectives and some of the, higher end, the DA, captains and things like that. They know they got a sweetheart system set up. Lots of people are getting their money, and he's going to ruin it. But the regular cops don't like him either because, well, he's going outside the law. He's doing things they can't do, and that bothers them. They also don't trust him, and let's go back to the obvious point. It's a guy dressed up as a bat. So they think he's crazy. They think he's a loon. But we never get the backstory on Gordon, but Gordon likes him, and Gordon trusts him, and Gordon knows that he's doing things that maybe he doesn't like or doesn't approve of, but that they're also somewhat necessary. Batman's doing something necessary because Gordon is aware of how corrupt a lot of the police force is. He may not have proof, but he knows it. That whole dynamic has always been there in virtually all the Batman films. We know that. Zoe Kravitz is an excellent Catwoman. Let's just put that one to bed right now. She is an excellent Catwoman. I saw elements of Michelle Pfeiffer and Anne Hathaway in her performance. So I really, really, really liked her portrayal. She has a elegance, a gracefulness, and obviously a very kind of cat-like gracefulness. I liked her costume or her dress or garb or whatever you want to call it. I like that a lot. It very much looked like someone who does not have an extraordinary amount of money, someone who had to make their costume themselves. Her mask or whatever you want to call that, her Catwoman mask, it looked totally appropriate. It looked like someone who didn't have money, and it was rough and it was ugly and, not ugly, but I'm saying in the sense that it wasn't polished. It didn't look like a costume department made it for someone. It looked like they made it for themselves. And she really does a great job as being a femme fatale. And that's not to say that she doesn't have strength or anything like that, but she uses all of the tools at her disposal. She uses her looks to distract men, to gain access where Batman can't get in without a significant amount of violence. She uses all that, but she can hold her own, and they did a really good job with her fights, portraying it as pretty realistic, stretches the bounds of reality just a smidge, but she doesn't go off, this, I'm going to assume she weighs somewhere between like 110 and 120 pounds, give or take. And you see this in movies these days where these, strong female characters, and I say that with quotation marks, are just beating the crap out of guys that are 200, 225 pounds, a foot and a half taller than them, and they're just manhandling them. Brute strength, okay? They didn't do that here. They made sure that she was just technically better in a lot of ways. And she escaped situations by the skin of her teeth, so to speak. She had to resort to clawing an eye out. And when she took guys down, she did it in a way that was at least somewhat believable because she went for very vulnerable points, throats, eyes, taking out a knee, things like that. So I appreciated that they did not make her overpowered. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of that there, but it wasn't anything that took you out of the movie. They did a really good job with that. Jeffrey Wright, I really enjoyed his portrayal as Gordon. I think he did a really good job. I always liked him as an actor. He has a lot of gravity as an actor. He brings a lot of weight to his roles. Colin Farrell is unrecognizable as the Penguin, and he really looks really well done in the vein of the Penguin that they're going for here, which is, kind of like I don't know if it was Batman Year One or The Long Halloween. There's elements of those comics that my understanding. I haven't seen The Long Halloween yet. I need to watch that. But there's elements of those comics that they pulled in, and they went for more of a realistic guy that would be called Penguin versus the campier and more, comic booky versions that you saw in Tim Burton's Batman's '89 and Batman Returns and Gotham, the show in Gotham. They went with a little bit more of just a guy who's kind of ugly. He has a limp and a bit overweight, so they call him a Penguin because he kind of waddles a little bit, instead of going overkill with the bird vibes like they did in Danny DeVito's portrayal. They literally kind of made him kind of sort of a penguin. Andy Serkis's role in the movie was smaller than I thought it would be. So I have to say that. I was a little surprised, not in a bad way, but I was a little surprised. I expected him to factor in a little more heavily. But I will say that when he is actively figuring into the movie, I think he did a great job. And I think it was really well done. Paul Dano did a great job as the Riddler. I mean, as a very tortured soul, very traumatized. And in this movie, they decided to go with a lot of parallels between him and Batman. And that's where this movie really shines with the writing, is very little's done seemingly accidental. There's a reason why the Riddler parallels Batman or Bruce, with them both being orphans. Now, some of these parallels, they don't specifically show that the Riddler knows who Batman is. They really dance very close to that line where Riddler almost tells Batman he knows who he is. But then they back away from it. And so it leaves you as the audience, us as the audience, it leaves it very vague and unstated. But it implies that he might know who Batman is. So I think that was really well done. Paul Dano did an excellent job. He was phenomenal. His plan was well executed. I really liked his costume. My understanding is that does pull from one of the comic series. I don't know which one. But, because at first I was thinking, not that I was thinking we were going to have Jim Carrey Riddler, but I was thinking we were going to have at least a little bit more what you think of the Riddler. And this really worked, though. This worked really well for what they were doing here. This movie is very grounded, and virtually everything in there looks possible and plausible. Pattinson, I'm not going to lie. I had my doubts. I had a lot of doubts about him as Batman because I know he's a little taller, but he's kind of a lankier guy. He's not a guy that looks like he can put on a lot of weight, and kind of, especially coming from the Bale and Affleck Batmans, he doesn't have that kind of mass, you know what I mean? But he did a great job. And it shows when you have a top-notch actor. There is so much that Pattinson did in this movie where he didn't say a single thing. He just looked at a character, looked at something. There's lots of shots when they're kind of doing the detective work after the fact of one of the Riddler's new killings, and they're just, going through the crime scene, and Batman's just looking around, and he's doing so much. Pattinson's doing so much with just his eyes and very, very slight facial expressions. And it's really well done. I mean, Pattinson's fantastic. He also brings a lot of youthful emotion and barely contained rage to this role. This is a guy that's only been doing it for 2 years, and for 2 years he's been finally able to let out some of the rage he's carried onto criminals and drug dealers, bad guys, murderers, all that. So he's still very much feeling that, and as far as he's concerned, Bruce Wayne is irrelevant. The character of Bruce Wayne, or the persona of Bruce Wayne, it's irrelevant. In fact, he basically only uses it one time. Alfred thinks, oh, hey, you're dressing up. You're finally going to go outside and, as yourself, without the costume on, and do something in the real world. Maybe even have a life. And he's like, no, I'm going to go to this funeral because lots of times serial killers like to see, see their killings in public, and they can't help but show themselves. So he's just using the Bruce Wayne persona, from a strategic and tactical perspective. I mean, he's raw. He's unbalanced. And again, like I said earlier, he's mistake prone. He makes mistakes. And he barely gets out of these situations, sometimes by the skin of his teeth. There's a scene where he's escaping the police, and he basically uses an inflatable squirrel suit. If you've ever seen those air gliding suits where you look like a flying squirrel, kind of something like that. And, he gets away, but he doesn't go away clean. He ends up doing to himself what would probably put most of us in the ICU, in a coma, and probably severe, brain damage. But of course, he's Batman, so it doesn't hurt him as bad. He's got a limp, and he's groaning and grunting in pain. But he makes mistakes. He's not polished. He's not experienced. He's still rough. And I think Pattinson did a great job portraying that. There was a lot of imagery and symbolism that I really liked. I got some very mild but notable Western vibes. And this movie is not a Western in any way, shape, or form, but there was just a couple moments where, well, it was a moment, I guess I should say, it was like a contained moment where Batman is slowly and menacingly approaching Penguin's car that has been flipped over and wrecked. Batman was in pursuit, and he's walking towards Penguin's car, and you hear his boots hitting, the ground every step he takes. And there's almost the slightest hint of a spur, like boot spurs on a cowboy. Almost the slightest hint of that. And I just kind of thought it was kind of cool because, there's a lot of vigilante justice in Westerns too. And so I don't know. I might be losing my mind on that one, but I thought that's what I felt I heard. So on the parallels with Batman and Riddler, there was something that I did scroll down that really stood out to me. Obviously, they were both orphans, is the way they portrayed it in this movie. But there was also a mask thing too, and kind of how Batman showed the Riddler, gave him his way forward, his answer to how he was going to, show the corrupt Gothamites, the elite people of Gotham, both in the police, in the government, and in the crime families, and take them to task. And it was by donning a mask. And so, there's some parallels there. But another parallel is the whole theme of this movie. At the beginning of the movie, Pattinson is doing some narration, and he's talking about how he has inspired fear into the criminals, causing them to think twice about what they do, wondering, as as he's narrating, the criminals look into the dark, shadowy corner where they're at, next to where they're at, and they're just scared the Batman's coming out of there because he likes to emerge from the shadows. In one of the scenes that you did see in the trailer, he beats down some guys, and they said, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm vengeance." There's an arc to that particular line, because that's what he feels like he is in the beginning of the movie. And by the end of the movie, some of the Riddler's followers, so to speak, they also think they're vengeance. And they say as much. And Batman hears it. And as he's narrating again at the end of the movie, it shows that he's learned he needs to be more than just vengeance. I took it as he understood that, inspiring fear, or instilling fear, I guess I should say, in the criminals, or the criminal element, is all fine and good. But it's only part of the solution. It is not the solution in and of itself. And he has to learn how to inspire hope in the good people. Just scaring people into not committing crimes is not good enough. You have to inspire the good people. And there's a whole bunch of this imagery at the end of the movie. There's a scene where Batman is leading away survivors in the flooding of the Gotham Arena, or whatever it is. And as he leads them away, he's got it's very beautiful imagery. He's got a flare for light, and he's leading people out of this wreckage through the water, wading through the water towards safety, and they flare out behind him, almost like a cape. It's really beautiful, but also in a way where it looks like it's like he's leading the way into the light, from the darkness and into the light. And there's a lot of emerging from darkness into the light imagery in this movie as well. Batman emerges from the darkness into the light often. The Riddler likes to stay in the darkness until the light is put on him, and then that's when he strikes, his subjects, or his prey, or his victim. Wayne Manor, that might be the most gothic Wayne Manor I've ever seen in my life. It looks positively ancient and extremely ornate. So I'm looking forward to more. I'm hoping they're going to do more of this particular Batman, and I'm hoping they're going to explore this a little more. I like the Batcave. I like that the Batcave was basically an abandoned train station underneath what I believe is underneath Wayne Manor. And this movie, it seems like Wayne Manor's in the middle of the city, and the city is just grown up around it. This city feels old, by the way. A lot of the Gothams, specifically Ben Affleck Batman and Bale Batman, the Gothams feel like a regular modern city. This Gotham, feels like an ancient city that's, has some modern buildings in it, but it feels very much like it's an ancient city that has some modern touches thrown into it, but it feels very ancient, very Gothic, very old. So I like that. This city really felt like a character in the movie in a lot of ways. But yeah, I would very much like to see more of the Batcave. The Batcave looked great. It looked like a place where him and Alfred built a lot of stuff, as opposed to basically borrowing all the cool tech from Wayne Enterprises that's already been created for the military or something like that. This very much looks more like a very rough and early version of more like the Ben Affleck Batman, where him and Alfred are building stuff, homebrewing stuff, in the Batcave. They're down there cooking. So this looks more like that. Not that I think this is directly supposed to, lead into the Ben Affleck Batman, but I just feel like they took a slight page out of that and then just basically rewound it to where not everything's glitz and glam. I mean, he has all the tech, but it's just thrown around. It's just placed in places. It's all imperfect. It doesn't look like he had a $10 million renovation, done by a professional outfit. It looked like, two guys made all this stuff and put it together. And it was interesting. Bruce Wayne's parents' bedroom, literally untouched. At least the impression they're giving you, it's been untouched since they died. And there's been a chain on the door. And that was really interesting to see that. I enjoyed that quite a bit. The Batmobile very much reflects this movie, this Batman, this raw, brutality, this raw rage. I mean, the Batmobile sounds angry, vicious, like a wild animal that's coming to get you. I really enjoyed the Batmobile. It did look like, I know that they said the goal was to make sure that it looked like something that Bruce Wayne himself built. And it does. It really does. Gas mileage is probably miserable because that thing's like 8, 10, 12 cylinder. I don't know what it is, but they kind of highlight some engine parts and things like that, kind of alluding to what we see later on when it finally does get introduced. And it gets introduced like a whole new character getting introduced, like an extension of this Batman. And it's a really great scene. It's really powerful. It's very intense. I'm not going to lie. So this movie really, really is right up there with what I consider be my favorite Batman movies, which is Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And it's hard because I as much as I want to include the Ben Affleck Batman in some of what I like, he didn't get his own Batman movie. He's in an ensemble movie in Justice League, and he's a bit of in a small ensemble or a I don't want to call it a buddy cop movie, but a duo movie with Superman in Batman versus Superman. And so he never got really his own movie. But there's a lot of elements that I did like of the Ben Affleck Batman. Some I didn't like, but I understood more after seeing Justice League and seeing the arc. That's one thing with Zack Snyder, the Zack Snyder DC Universe movies that he's made, taking his very sweet time, giving all these characters an arc. Like the Superman we see at the end of Man of Steel is still not Superman yet. I think he's Superman after Justice League, the Zack Snyder Justice League. The Ben Affleck Batman we saw in Batman vs. Superman is not supposed to be the Batman we know and love. It's a guy who has fallen. He's disillusioned. He's given up hope. And by the end of the Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League, he's actually back to being, he's been redeemed. He's been brought back to being the Batman we hope for and look for. So, I like arcs, and I like a living character that evolves and changes over time and reacts to what happens to him. And with Batman, there's so much there to mine. So I really, really, really enjoyed this movie. I mean, it really is fantastic, and I like I said, I put it right up there with my favorites, Batman Begins and Dark Knight. And I really, really, really just sometimes I'm a little lost for words because I really have almost nothing negative to say about this movie. And that is amazing. Before I wrap this up, I want to point this out. This movie has been in production for the better part of 2 years. COVID, the emergence of the pandemic really messed this movie up, production-wise. There was a lot of drama behind the scenes. There's drama about Pattinson didn't want to work out. Apparently, him and Zoe Kravitz may have had a little hanky-panky behind the scenes or something, and she got pregnant, I thought. I heard something about that. They came back and they've reshot a bunch of this movie. And production has stopped, restarted, stopped again, restarted again. I mean, this movie had a lot of issues. And I'm not saying it is a phenomenal movie taking that into account. Taking all of those things that would derail most productions. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you know, Warner Brothers has a long history in recent times of messing with productions. They messed with Batman vs. Superman, and it's still kind of a pretty imperfect movie. The extended cut is a little better, or the ultimate cut, or whatever they call it. They absolutely destroyed Justice League when they brought Joss Whedon in, and he turned it into some kind of weird, campy joke fest. Thankfully, Zack Snyder was able to go back and recut the movie and reshoot some scenes to fill out the movie the way he wanted it done, and it's a far, far better movie for it. The original Suicide Squad was supposed to be directed by David Ayer, but what we got doesn't look like it was directed by anybody. Looks like it was directed by the person who was tasked to edit it in the cutting room. In the editing room. They just made a movie in the editing room. It's so out of place. It almost looks like it's not in chronological order, like it's been edited out of order somehow, but you're not supposed to notice, but it's really terrible. There's been a lot of messing around by Warner Brothers. So this movie is a legit, really, really, really good, phenomenal movie. And I'm not grading it on a curve. So that's where I land on it. So wrapping up, I appreciate everything you guys are doing. It comes down to liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving reviews and things like that. But if you like what I'm doing, please share it. I implore you, please share it on social media. It really does help this podcast to grow. And I've got a lot of plans. Hopefully I'm going to be working on getting myself into an area that's a little bit more acoustically better. Let's call it that. So I'm looking forward to some of those things this year. I got a lot of plans this year for this podcast. But obviously, biggest plans is I'm going to keep this up. So, but thank you again so much. And until next time, take care and have a great day. Thanks for listening. The Way of the Dad podcast is produced and recorded by, well, me, a stunningly average husband and father, who appreciates all of the likes, shares, reviews, and support you give. If you would like to reach out, you can find the podcast on its Facebook page, and of course you can email me at wayofthedadpodcast@gmail.com. Come back next time as we continue to fearlessly dive into the depths of dadness.